Hello, and welcome to the first module of the online course, Introduction to Therapeutic Horticulture. We're excited to have you with us. This module contains a brief overview of some of the ways gardens and nature have been used to impact human health through the ages. I believe that seeing how gardens and nature have helped people in the past can give us a foundation for understanding why the practice of therapeutic horticulture can be so powerful as a tool for bringing us health and wellness today in the 21st century. So let's get started. We're at Lecture 1.1, The Role of Gardens and Nature, Ancient through the 18th Century. So in this lecture, we will cover some significant cultures and institutions that have understood that there is this important connection between people and plants, and they've used this understanding to nurture that connection in various ways. This is a very brief overview. It covers a very long historical period from ancient times through the 18th century, so consider this a mere introduction to the topic. At the end of this lecture and Lecture 1.2, you will have a chance to do some research on your own to discover a different culture and how they have used gardens to improve human health. So generally speaking, nature and gardens throughout history have brought us intuitively and experientially health and healing, and they've done this in various ways. The ways they have brought us healing can be roughly categorized into 4 categories. We'll be looking at these categories more closely later in the course. So for the first category of physical health, it's perhaps the easiest to understand because plants are the very source of our livelihood for the food they bring us, for the oxygen they give us, and the shelter that they can provide us. Simply put, no plants, no people on this earth. In terms of social health and social bonding and community practices, gardens have flourished in both individual and common outdoor spaces through the ages. We know that emotionally, the ability of gardens to reduce stress and recharge the psyche has long been understood and used by various cultures to heal its people. And lastly, spiritually, the beauty and wonder of the natural world has been a catalyst to pull us out of our small space, our small world, and to connect us to something larger than ourselves. From ancient Egypt, we know that through records that court physicians prescribed walks in gardens for royalty who were mentally disturbed. This picture shows a drawing from the 14th century BCE. There's a garden depicted from a royal's tomb, and we see many of the elements we know that bring comfort even today. There's water, there's animals, and there are familiar plants that bear food. All of these can be seen in this picture. The lotus in particular in ancient Egypt was seen as a symbol of creation and rebirth, and that is also included in this photograph of the picture. In ancient Persia, gardens were also built for relaxation and renewal outside palaces and in places where the common people went. What made gardens special during this period was that gardens were not only part of the architecture, but they were actually the focus of it. Aside from the practical aspects of production of food and the sensual pleasure derived from them, the symbolism of bringing order out of chaos, and duplicating paradise on earth was a powerful statement for the reigning king of the time. In Pompeii, we know from excavations that 18% of the land was devoted to gardens, and these gardens ranged from commercial gardens, temple gardens, public gardens, and also those associated with tombs. In this photograph, you can see Mount Vesuvius in the background, which erupted and destroyed Pompeii in the 1st century AD. So to briefly summarize, in Pompeii, we see that gardens had served many needs. These needs included practical, spiritual, and community functions. And not only did they supply the family food, but they were a place to gather and to entertain, a place to eat, a place for children to play, and a place to worship. Sacred groves had religious and mythological importance to many world cultures. This slide depicts the remnants of ancient monoliths from a sacred grove in India, which were part of both Hindu and Buddhist religions of that period. We know that Native Americans consider particular landmarks and forests sacred, as do many religions even today. We're moving to medieval England and Europe here. The Middle Ages in Europe lasted for roughly 800 to 1,000 years. And this was known as a violent time when there were warring kingdoms and marauders traveling through the countryside, creating danger and destruction. During this time, the monasteries were religious centers, but more than that, they were also the centers for education and books and sanctuaries for people to get away from what was happening. They were a refuge. They provided food, they provided herbs, and they provided medicines for the monks and for the surrounding community. They used manual labor in their gardens and spiritual reading to keep busy and to avoid being idle. And for them, the cemetery gardens acted as a symbol of heaven and paradise and provided spiritual meaning during this time. This picture shows a garden of Ueno, Japan. The shogun built temples and planted cherry trees on a hill of Ueno to signify the legitimacy of Edo as a center of political and economic power. We can make the connection today to the cherry trees of Washington, D.C. as a center of political and economic power in the U.S. Ueno became a famous and popular gathering place to enjoy the spring cherry blossoms. And now the Garden of Ueno is an annual gathering spot that has evolved into the celebration of Hanami, which literally means to contemplate the flowers and to celebrate spring renewal. In the Renaissance in the 17th century, Parisian royal gardens were actually open to the public for the first time, and this is the Garden of Tuileries, where a promenade was discovered, where people could come and mingle and show off their latest outfits and have social interaction with each other. And this was a new happening for them during the Renaissance. The gardens were places for communication and being together with others. So that's our brief retrospective of ancient and medieval cultures up to the 18th century. And this concludes Lecture 1.1. Go now to the assigned reading for 1.1 and the drag and drop exercises for 1.1 that goes with this lecture before continuing on with Lecture 1.2 in this module.